Okay, then welcome to you, dear audience. And of course, welcome to you, Luisa and Xiaolu, for coming to this talk today. And before we start with our little talk, I would like to introduce the two of you briefly. So Dr. Wang Xiaolu is the curator of this year's edition of our Chinese Film Festival, which has the title Leben, which translates to country life in English. He did his doctorate at the Beijing Film Academy and is now working for the China Film Archive. He is a columnist, curator, and author of 3 monographs with the titles Film and the Disease of Time, Evaluation and Testimony of Independent Film Culture from 2008, Film and Politics from 2014, and Film and Its Self-Will from 2019. Thank you for coming and talking to us today. And Luisa Prudentino is a lecturer of History of Chinese Cinema at the University of Artois. Since 2012, she's an active member of the research laboratory CERLOM, Centre d'études et de recherche sur la littérature et l'oralité du monde. Excuse my French. She's working at Le Havre Science Pro College and at INALCO in Paris. Between 1985 and 1989, she was living in China. After her return, she founded the first film festival in Italy dedicated to contemporary Chinese cinema. In 2003, she published Le Regard de Ombre, Shadows Eyes. Her latest works are The Dictionary of Chinese Cinema, China, Hong Kong, Taiwan from 2019, and China, United States, Cross Views Through Film. Thank you for coming. I'm really looking forward to hearing your views on independent cinema in China today. And maybe we start just like that with you, Luisa, giving us an introduction into the origins and developments of early Chinese independent cinema.
Okay. Thank you, Dörte, for this introduction. And thank you to, of course, to invite me to this festival, and thank you everyone to come to listen to me today. I apologize if my English is not particularly good, but I will try to do my best. And before giving the floor to Wang Xiaolu to talk about current events in China's cinema, I think that it's good for our audience to know the first steps that Chinese filmmakers took towards artistic independence, and consequently to the genesis of which is called today auteur cinema. So I will just do quite a summary of first period that which began in 1989 and lasted to the first year of the new millennium. It all started in the aftermath of the Tiananmen events in June 1989, in a period of unfortunately repression, of a drastic curtailment of the relative freedom that had blossomed in the few years before '89. It resulted in a breach in the monopolistic state system, but what is important to know is that originally Chinese independent cinema was not really a conscious move towards artistic freedom. It was rather a personal initiative driven by special circumstances. So what is meant by independent cinema? It was mainly underground filmmaking, breaking loose from the state-sanctioned production system. But of course, we have to know why we arrived to this situation. How this happened, and why, and how it became a full-blown independent movement. So another important thing is that Chinese independent cinema developed at the same time in both fields of documentary and fiction, and actually blurred the two concepts. So in this context, I think that it's important to talk about one director. His name is Zhang Yuan. Zhang Yuan was graduated from Beijing Film Academy in June 1989, so a very delicate period. And why I decided to talk about him? Because he is generally credited with the first, what is called first independent film of the post-Tiananmen period. And this film is Mama. But what is interesting is that is not exactly so. But for sure, this move did signal a movement to cut loose from the state studio system to shoot films that would not otherwise have been made. So this is the first important step in this process. And what is interesting is what I was just saying, that in Zhang Yuan's decision to shoot outside the studio, to shoot this movie, Mama, outside the studio, was a circumstantial move. He had no original, definite pre-intention. Zhang Yuan, at that moment, he wants just finish this movie, despite all difficulties. So, Mama started as a project, as normal project, as official project of the Children's Film Studio in Beijing. But 3 months later, the studio decided to cancel the whole project because the studio considered that it was not deemed profitable. Why? We will see why later, because of the story that was particularly different from other stories of movies at that period. In any case, the project was taken by another studio. It was the studio August 1st, but it was cancelled again because of Tiananmen's events. But at that time, Zhang Yuan was already working a lot on it. And he doesn't want to give up. And also because it was a particular movie. This movie is kind of, as I said before, it's a movie between documentary and fiction. It's the story of a mother that struggles a lot for his son that is handicapped, and he's really alone. Her husband doesn't care about it. So Zhang Yuan was very interested to this story and has interviewed several mothers of handicapped children. and he has integrated these interviews in the movie. And so he was really very interested to finish this movie. He doesn't want to give up. And he said, okay, if I cannot do this movie in the studio, I will just do by myself. So he shot the film in his own apartment, mostly in black and white, with a shoestring budget of 10,000 yuan. And this 10,000 yuan were just financed by family and friends and so on. When the movie was public in China in the beginning, but it was banned immediately because it was considered too dark. On the contrary, abroad, the film was really applauded in various film festivals, and on that occasion, Western critics hailed Zhang Yuan as the first Chinese independent director and producer. To this, and it was Zhang Yuan was the first that was really astonished, because he has not idea that he was making, and he has made the first independent movie. Things were more clear in this context with the second movie by Zhang Yuan, Beijing Bastards, because from the beginning, this movie show no sign of either license number or film studio. The very silence proclaims it is our system. So this is really independent movie. No producers wants to give money. No studio wants to produce the movie. The movie were financed by three main figures of the movie, and one is the singer Cui Jian that you can see in the slide. But in any case, there was very important lack of money. But anyway, the film could be finished thanks to the help of the French Ministry of Culture. So the most important things of these two movies are that, first of all, at least it was artistic independence. And Zhang Yuan wants strongly make this film. And the second thing is that his style was really interesting, as I said before, between documentary and fiction. But it was not the first time that in the history of Chinese cinema that there was this kind of process. The first time it was in Chinese films of the 30s, especially in this movie, Wild Torrent by Chen Bugao. And this has, as Beijing started, as Beijing Bastards, sorry, this movie also started with a disaster. But this time it was a natural disaster that happens in May 1931, when unfortunately the Yangtze River flooded 16 provinces. So Chen Bugao wants to shoot the area, and this contrast between the poor people, victims, rich people, and he decided to come back to Shanghai with a quite important number of rushes of the movie. He talked with Xia Yan, that is another important figure of Chinese 30s cinema, And they decide to make a film exactly between documentary and fiction. So what I want to, why I want to take this movie as example is because I want to show that in both periods, 30s and 90s, the intellectual's prior reflection, the artist's awareness were the determining factors, the precondition to make these movies. So this is really very interesting similar points between these two periods, because intellectuals, artists have always been the real avant-garde in the society. So even in the Chinese society, whatever the period, historical period. So despite the ban, Zhang Yuan continued to make films, but first filmed a documentary that was at that time an area enjoying relatively more freedom. And this is another important point of independent Chinese cinema, because documentaries generally constitute the first choice for directors who start making films in this period. And it's not a surprise that this is the most productive category in Chinese independent filmmaking. It is generally considered that the movement started in the winter of 1991-92, a big conference on documentary filmmaking took place in Beijing at that time, and was the opportunity to screen a number of new works, mainly for television. But among all these movies, there was one movie in particular. It is Bombing in Beijing, The Last Dreamers, made by Wu Wenguan. And why it is particular? Because it was totally different from the classical way to make documentaries in China. Wu Wenguan started to film at the beginning of 1989, and he focused on 5 of his artist friends. And his artist friends refused to go to quit Beijing for another job in a remote province in China. They want to stay in Beijing. They want to realize their dreams. So that's why this documentary is, how do you say, capture an authentic impression of a dark reality of post-Tiananmen. The film broke new ground in its style, and it was influenced by what we called cinema verite, and developed into a personalized and subjective approach. And this is a characteristic very important of Chinese independent movie, because it's a new conception, and a new conception of realism that independent filmmakers will bring in different ways. For example, there is another movie at that time, There Is a Strong Wind in Beijing. It was very simple, a movie when Zhu Anqi, the director, just captured direct and spontaneous reaction of people on the street of Beijing when confronted to this very simple question. There is a strong wind in Beijing, and a lot of versions, a lot of answers about this wind. What is this wind? Is it the real wind, or it's an allegory? This is really the meaning of this movie. Or, for example, there was another movie in public made by Jia Zhangke before he became the important director that he is, that we know today. And this approach in public is almost the same as I have already told, but we are still in open spaces. The movie There is a Strong Wind in Beijing was in all streets of Beijing. In public is in the old street of Datong, that is a small city where Jia Zhangke is born. But there will be gradually a new style, and the filmmakers will gradually move from open spaces to closed ones. This is the example, for example, of Old Man, made by Yang Lina. Very interesting movie that documents a group of old men who gradually approach the end of their life in day after day casual gatherings. And Yang Lina, she only had her DV camera, and she has filmed them for 2 years, following their regular come and going and registering their conversation. So it seems obvious that realism is therefore the main characteristic of independent cinema. Realism as concerning the quality, as concerning the most important matter, and independence as concerning the form, how these movies have been filmed, have been made, and have been produced. In the realist trend of Chinese independent cinema, DV, of course, is considered the most important instrument that give filmmakers a lot of opportunities to film without more freedom, and a really good tool to attain reality easily and directly. And this is interesting also to know that DV has been called the pen of the digital era. That's why a good number, important number of Chinese writers decide to start to make movies. For example, Zhu Wen, that makes Seafood in 2001 and won the special jury prize at Venice Film Festival, for example. So what we can do is, as a conclusion, is that at the beginning of a new millennium, independent cinema therefore displays a multifaceted stylistic and aesthetic research. And another particularity that starts in the beginning of the new millennium and totally changes the situation is the changement of the statue, if I can see that, of cinema. The cinema was considered before as a cause. A cause is meaning, an undertaking which had a serious political and pedagogical functions. But in the official documents, at the beginning of new millennium, cinema became industry. So from cause, we go to industry. And this is really important changement. Why? Because, in other words, economic constraints are now added to political or ideological restrictions. And this is really very bad situation for the world of cinema. And from that point, from now, the difficulties are started for this movement. But independent cinema tries to survive at the margins and remains at that time, in spite of everything, in spite of every difficulties, a creative sector full of drive and dynamism. But these were 20 years ago. So now this is the situation, the delicate situation of the Chinese independent movies in the beginning of 2000. Other changes, of course, have taken place over the last few years, and that's why I will leave to Wang Xiaolu to talk about. So thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Dorothy. Lisa's speech shows her deep research on China and Chinese independent films. And her speech reminds me a lot of China film history. Now I want to continue with what she said. Indeed, as Luisa said, the Chinese government department began to develop the film industry after 2000, which was only interrupted in recent years, not just because of the pandemic. The industrialization of Chinese films has been going on in China for 20 years and has had a profound impact on Chinese films. At the beginning, people believed that this commercialization would have a more serious impact on Chinese independent films. I remember having a conversation with director Wang Xiaolu at that time. And he said, the current situation is like tying our independent filmmakers' feet and throwing them into the sea, asking you to compete with imported foreign commercial films. And they will glut and watch you die. Yes, at that time, many people were worried about the marketization trend of movies. But many years later, we found that the industrialization of film had brought unexpected result. Because if the management department pursued commercial success very much, it would require a variety of film talents and types, as well as a certain degree of sincerity in the expression of Chinese cinema films. Otherwise, films would not be able to move people's heart. Another reason is that after the film industry developed, this has attracted a large amount of idol and hot money from society. And the budget for independent films is already not high, making their financing much easier. In fact, in 2003, 3 famous independent film festivals suddenly appeared in China. With the development and widespread use of DV technology, film production became cheaper. In fact, a large number of independent films emerged in China. And in the following decade, independent films flourished until around 2012. Independent film festivals and screening spaces were gradually banned, and independent films lost their projection space, which has a huge impact on independent films. However, at that time, the industrialization of Chinese films required a lot of fresh blood. So independent films provided a lot of talent for the film industry, such as Li Ruijun, the director of Return to Dust, released last year. These independent filmmakers moved from underground to above ground and into the officially licensed cinema system, but they still maintain a certain degree of independence. Perhaps Return to Dust is not a good example. As the version shown in the cinema differs greatly from the author's version. I mean, earlier on, I thought some films could still be considered independent, even though they received the Dragon Label. The Dragon Label, what is the Dragon Label? It is a screening license issued by the government from the film management department. Although there are not many such films. For example, the film Mr. Tree that we selected for this time is like this. The director of this film is Han Jie, and the producer is Jia Zhangke. It has a Dragon Label, but it is still considered an independent film by us. However, as I mentioned earlier, there are not many such films. Their emergence is due to special contingency reasons. Sometimes the standards for film censorship are not always the same. During different period, the situation of each film is not exactly the same. There are many contingencies in it. Luisa just emphasized in her speech that the characteristic of independent films from the 1990s was that they were underground. I think it is correct. But in the past 20 years, the situation has become even more complex. As the academic community of the independent films in China has been debating, whether having the Dragon Label is definitely not an independent film. I think the connotation standards of films in China are becoming diverse. And many times, people no longer define independent films solely based on a political protest, although politics is still very important. Indeed, there was a time when the management department allowed a certain degree of independent expression, which was also a prerequisite for independent filmmakers and cinemas to collaborate. However, the situation has been changing in recent years. I have always have a viewpoint that the emergence of independent films in China is a product of the development of private capital, which is a unique situation in China. For example, the film Mom, directed by Zhang Yuan, mentioned by Luisa, was sponsored by private capital.
Yeah.
However, in recent years, private capital and private enterprises in China have been shrinking, which has led to a narrowing of the financing space for independent films. So this is a very interesting Chinese phenomenon. And I guess the meaning of independent films varies in different countries. In addition, I predict that if the independent expression space in the cinema continues to decrease, the production mode of independent films will return to the state of underground films in the 1990s. This also depends on the change in the overall situation. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to ask a question about continuing to, both of you mentioned the film Mama, and then Luisa, you said that it was censored after a very short time in China and afterwards shown abroad in festivals, which brings me to the question, not just for this film, but for independent movies from China. What status does independent do abroad festivals abroad hold for Chinese independent cinema?
Yeah, thank you for this question. And at that time, the audience abroad, festival abroad, have been really important for Chinese independent movies, because these movies were not, it was not possible to show in China. And it was really, you know, they must be seen somewhere. So at least abroad, it was possible. Because at that time, the politics has always been strong in China, as we know. But at least at that time, for two independent movies, it was not so strong, because it was like, okay, we just don't allow this movie to be seen in China. If directors wants to show abroad, we just don't care. So at least it was possible to see these movies abroad. So at least there was a possibility to filmmakers to show their movies. It was a problem for them. It was, of course, it was not the best thing for them, because as always they said, we are Chinese, we make Chinese movies for Chinese audience. So why we don't have to show our movies in our countries and we have to show abroad? But at least there was this possibility. Now the situation, and Wang Xiaolu is totally right, the situation is really difficult now, also concerning the audience abroad. Why? Because for a lot of reasons, Western is not interested to Chinese movies as before, or is not interested to China as before. So this is one cause, but another cause is that politics has made a lot of, how do you say, a lot of things, a lot of rules in order to discourage filmmakers and producers to show their movies abroad. So the big problem now is that without this help, difficulties are growing and growing for filmmakers, because there are not so many places now to see these movies. That's why people, as a lot of filmmakers, were independent before and are becoming official or are becoming too mainstream now. But I think that that's normal in considering this kind of situation.
Then do you feel there's still independent cinema or independent filmmakers can still be called like this today? Or what's your forecast for it?
You know, the situation is really difficult now, and especially for independent cinema. And as Wang Xiaolu told us, that at least before, the economy in China was quite strong in order to let some enterprises or even some entrepreneur that wants to that like Chinese independent movies to give some money. But now it's really difficult, and I think that, you know, of course the situation is not good, and a lot of festivals, for example, that were consecrated to Chinese independent movies don't exist anymore. But I think that Chinese history, the history of Chinese cinema, has always shown us that the filmmakers never give up. And I hope that it will be the same thing also today, despite all difficulties. I always said one thing, that is, regardless to the labels, independent or author cinema or official cinema or mainstream cinema, it doesn't matter, these labels. I always hope that cinema in China can express its creativity and thought independently of the rules imposed by government or by the laws of the markets. This is the most important thing. And now it's difficult because of the politics, because of the ideological context and so on. But sometimes there is still possibility to make film. And I know that sometimes some miracles of that happens. We say, now the situation is really very, very bad in China, but sometimes I just see some movies that are really, really nice, really good. So I hope that it can be still possible, despite of all the difficulties that we know now.
And thank you. Xiaolu, I would like to ask you, you already mentioned the film Mr. Tree Hello, but also we have more films that you selected as the curator for this year's festival. So I would like to know what is the standing of those films selected within the independent cinema in China now?
I think most of these films at this festival are independent films, which can also be said they are also films. However, the situation is different for each film. After we finished selecting the films, I suddenly realized that all of the fiction films we had selected had received the Dragon label, and they had already been screened or about to be screened in the cinema. Of course, this is not something we consciously do. All the documentaries we have selected have not received the Dragon label, and they can definitely be considered independent films. However, their market value is certainly not very large, but they have enormous cultural value, which is also why we choose them. We choose these films based on the director's independent thinking, depth of thinking, their creativity in film art. As you know, this year's theme is rural China. So we have chosen films with rural themes. China is also a country based on agriculture. In fact, since the 1980s and the 1990s, Chinese filmmakers have preferred to film cities. In China, this process is consistent with the urbanization process of the entire society. There have been few rural films in the past 20 years. In recent years, a group of directors have started filming rural themed films, which express that China's rural society has become ruins after intense urbanization. Of course, not all films are like this. Red Flowers and Green Leaves is about shooting a village with religious belief, and the rural life of the characters in the film is satisfying. As you know, I call the films new rural films. It's because it's compared to past rural themed films. These new rural films are not produced under the official studio system, and most of them sincerely express personal feelings about Chinese rural society. I think the directors of these works are still deeply influenced by Chinese independent films. Their films express their ideas, but many of them are related to the director's personal life experience, rather than being adapted from other people's novels. Things like Slow Scene and the Widowed Witch, they criticize and mourn the current rural society.
And what do you feel the German audience, as we mostly have it, can or should take away after watching these films?
Okay.
What you hope? What's your hope for us?
We hope that German audiences can see a new trend in the recent development of Chinese films. as well as a reflection of Chinese intellectuals in more society. I also hope they can take this opportunity to see the changes in China. Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. I think there was one question you really wanted to ask Luisa.
Yes. I have one more question for Luisa. Which film from the selection left the biggest impression on you and why? How is this film different from the independent films you have seen before? Thank you.
It's thank you for this question. It's a little bit difficult for me to choose just a movie because every independent movie has independent or not independent. I mean, if we talk about author cinema d'auteur, I think that it is difficult to choose one movie for one particular thing. In the past, the movies that I liked, for sure, there was the trilogy of Zhang Xiaolu and Platform and Unknown Pleasures, because I think that it was important at that time to show how youth were totally were suffering about changement in China and about this strong changement, and especially the way how this changement arrived suddenly in China. So then I think that now, if we talk about documentaries, I like Wang Bing's documentaries because he really has a sense of history, and I like the way how he wants to film and show ordinary life in China and how this life has been influenced by changements of the politics and especially economy in China. And about this selection, I like of course most of them, and there has been one movie that influenced me a lot, is Balloon by Pema Tse-den, because I like the way how Pema Tse-den is always he wants to always show the changement in Tibet, and I like it because he doesn't focus on not only on spirituality, as a lot of filmmakers have made or just always make now concerning Tibet. And it's also ordinary life. And I like it is the way how he showed that in Balloon. It's a kind of comedy, because I think that there is not so many comedies in the Chinese cinema now. And this maybe it's a point that should be the filmmakers should be really focused on it, because we know also that one of the difficulties of documentaries or cinéma d'auteur of independent movies is also that they are not be able to capture the attention from the audience, because Chinese audience doesn't want to see on the screen what they see in everyday lives. So I think that the way of Pema Tse-den to use the comedy in order to show real problem, real situation in Tibet or China or whatever is a very interesting way. And I think that Chinese author, the cinema of author in China now should go more in this direction.
Thank you, Luisa.
Thank you, Asa. Thank you.
Then I would like to open up this little talk and discussion to questions from the audience. If you want to ask something, then please write it into our F&A section. And also, if you don't feel, if you want to ask in another language, I guess feel free to, and we will find the translation. So far, there's no further questions. I'll give it a little time. Unless the two of you, maybe you have something you wanted to add, you could use this time now.
It's always a little bit difficult at the beginning to have some questions from, because people must do. Now, I just want to add that of course it's a moment that is particularly delicate for China, for Chinese people, and for Chinese cinema. Also because Chinese cinema has always been a mirror of life and history in China. I think that even if there are a lot of difficulties now, the most important thing is that Chinese film must be seen as much as possible. I know that now places are less and less. For filmmakers, there are only a few parallel circuits. There is, for example, in China, there is this festival that is named First Festival in Xining, in the province of Qinghai. This is still good. There were there were some festivals before, and that now is in Nanjing or in Yunnan, also in Beijing. This festival doesn't exist anymore. But I really hope that the filmmakers can find a place in which the movies can be shown. Every possibility is good. So that's why the initiatives such as this of Nuremberg Festival is fundamental, is really, really important. And that's why I strongly encourage you to continue. And I really hope that we can still have another edition of this festival, and also that this kind of initiative can be more and more, if not in China, at least abroad. In France, the situation is a little bit better. It was not really good as before. Before we had more film festivals, but we already discussed why we have less and less possibilities. But never mind. If really, we don't have to stress the label and say independent or not independent, or especially say independent is good, official is not good. It's not like that anymore. The most important thing is that we can see these movies, we can talk about these movies, we can give the opportunity to filmmakers to be showed and to can express. And in this way, Chinese cinema will continue to express, and this is really important.
Thank you. We got one question in the Q&A, two. The first one, I will try to translate it to Wang Xiaolu, is about the Mr. Tree Hello. Does it feel Kafkaesque? Oh, I think we can't hear you. Yes, now we can.
I think it is different from Kafka.
Okay, and then okay, there comes a second part from it. I'm so sorry, I don't read enough Chinese to translate it to you, but Google Translator will. Okay, this is about another. Okay, we follow with another question first. How did Western production of films in its openness to Chinese markets like Marvel movies, Disney streaming services impacted Chinese movie making? I'll read it once more. How did Western production of films in its openness to Chinese markets like Marvel movies, Disney streaming services impact Chinese movie making? So the question is about Western films on Chinese movies.
Well, the impact is, of course, is very strong. In many films. For example, if we talk about foreign, European movies still don't impact actually Chinese movie as before. For example, in the 80s or a little bit still in the 90s, the French New Wave influences a lot, has a strong impact on filmmakers at that time. Now is since the new millennium, but also a little bit before, the stronger impact comes from Hollywood. And the impact is on contents, because of course this a little bit legendary or a little bit fantastic movies and so on have a strong impact on the Chinese audience. And also, the development of some technicals some techniques like 3D in the animation and movies, or other fields. So I think that the most important impact is that now Chinese movies are trying to follow Hollywood structure, Hollywood contents, Hollywood box office structures. And so it's not really, how do you say, it's not really a surprise that we talk now in China about a phenomenon that is called Chinawood. It's like it's a little bit like Hollywood. But even in this case, I think that the Chinese movies, they can be inspired from Hollywood. They can be inspired from a Western, but they always try to have a Chinese way. And after this impact, the Chinese cinema will always be Chinese cinema. We have always seen that during all story of Chinese cinema, and is still today the same situation.
Then there's a third question regarding the film Balloon. The film does end with a scene of the heroine becoming a nun with her sister, instead of showing the decision whether she gave up or continued to have children. So the question here is about the meaning of the ending of such a movie.
I don't see especially explanation for that. I think that what Pema Tsedan wants to say in this movie is that he wants to say that finally the situation in Tibet is like in China or like in other parts of the world. So I haven't really seen special meaning for the ending of this movie. I don't know if Wang Xiaolu is agree with me.
I think we can't hear you.
Sorry, I'm sorry. I think she's in a difficult position because the Buddhism gave him a lot of trouble, but she has no other choice.
Yeah, exactly.
He still enters the temple. I think this is a very difficult position. Yes, she's in a difficult position, and she was in a great pain.
Yeah, sometimes we have just no choice, and that's what Wu is saying. She has no choice, and sometimes even in other contexts different from Tibet or China, you have no choice, and you have to just make a choice.
Yes.
Okay, for the moment, this is all the questions that we had. So unless there's one in the next 10 seconds, I would thank you both. Thank you, Wang Xiaolu, for staying up late for us for this talk. And thank you, Luisa, for joining this talk.
Thank you.
I thought it was really interesting, and I hope to see you at some other time. And thank you, audience. And I hope you will enjoy the next few days that are still left of the film festival.
Yeah, it's really important to see movies. not only Chinese, but especially Chinese, and especially in this moment.
Oh, now I see one raised hand. I will try to. I think they will.
Oh, I just want to ask the Dr. Wang about the Kafka style in the Mr. Tree. So the answer is no or yes or something.
No,
Yes,
I think it's different. I
Oh.
think it's different.
Good. Okay, thank you.
Okay, then thank you all and enjoy your Sunday night.
thank you. You too.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye,
Bye-bye.
Xiaolu. Bye-bye, Dörte. See you.
Bye.
Bye.